Every mile drives the economy, from the drivers who fill the shelves to the professionals, investments, and innovations that support it. Behind it all are decisions made every day, under pressure and at scale. Hosted by leaders from across the industry, this is Cents Per Mile, insights that drive better decisions, a CD Life production.
Welcome back. I am joined here with Kevin Hall and Tom Albrecht for episode 2 of season 6 of the Cents Per Mile podcast. We really appreciate you joining us. Today, we are going to be talking about a super cycle. Is it here, and how that may impact tomorrow's decisions? So like, subscribe, comment, and give us feedback to hear so we know what you guys want to hear from us. So Tom, I'd like to kick it off with you of really, how would you describe what is a super cycle?
Okay, that's a great starting point. So let's define a super cycle along two things. One would be in duration, and then from a pricing perspective. So if we look at the last several trucking cycles, they've all been 2 years or less. In other words, where it favored motor carriers, where they were getting positive pricing to either maintain or grow their profit margins. And so it's been a long time. The last time we really had a so-called super cycle defined as 2 years or more would be roughly mid-03 through mid-06. So about 36 to 40 months, depending on where you pick the actual beginning and ending points. So it's been a long, long time. But right now, it looks like all of the ingredients are in place that we could have a super cycle. I've gone back and studied the different cycles pre-COVID. Now, let's just throw away COVID. COVID was it was freight on steroids, amongst other terms. And so the more normal cycles before that, each had one regulatory change, and it was a positive environment for 18 to 24 months. And then we have to go back all the way over 20 years to get one that's longer than that. Well, what have we seen in the last several months? We've already seen 5 either regulatory and or litigation changes. And we know there's probably another 6 to 8, maybe 10 more things that are on the horizon. So if in the past, kind of to quote Billy Crystal from City Slickers, the one thing, well, if in the past we had one thing that really drove pricing and a favorable environment, especially for the truckload industry, we've already got a handful, and we got another handful that's coming. So the ingredients are absolutely in place for a recovery that would last longer than 2 years, that would allow carriers to recover much of the lost margin, and at a minimum where pricing would exceed CPI or the consumer price index.
So Tom, how long do you think a super cycle is going to last? Like if this one comes around, what is it, longer than 12 to 18 months? Is it where we get into like 5 years? Like what kind of
well, everybody wants
timing are we talking about when we talk about super?
It's going to be 4 years, it's going to be 5 years. I always tell people, let's just focus on this year. But the ingredients are in place. So if we go back to the definition, we know that the 17-18 recovery lasted about 18 months. The late 13 to early 15 was about 18 months. Then right after the housing crisis, it was about 18 months. So again, I'm using as a benchmark, and this is just my opinion, we need it to be 2 years or more to at least beat what we've had these last 3 cycles. And if you think about it, COVID itself was only about 2 years. It was from around July 1st, give or take a month, of 2020, and it was clearly ending by June of 2022. So that was a 2-year one, even though it felt like about 4 years worth of freight jammed into 2. So I think it's an exciting time to be back in trucking again, whether it's a small carrier like a lot of your audience is. The spot market's already had the early moves, but it's going to be a good environment for contract and spot. But there will be ebbs and flows, which we can probably get to a little bit later on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so if you look at I question whether we're actually, is it just a big recovery, or is it just truly a super cycle? Does it have to have other changes, like structural changes to the industry really fundamental things that change the economics of the industry.
Before I weigh in on that, I'd like to get Karen's perspective as the CEO of a trucking company. What do you think about the thoughts of a super cycle? You've lived through all those other cycles too. And at the peak, it always felt like it would go on a lot longer and then suddenly it was over.
Yeah, I like what you both said, that this is probably one of the most exciting times to be in trucking. And the piece that leaves probably that biggest hole for me, or the unknown, is regulatory change. That government has typically progressed very slowly, right? You have plenty of time to pivot and maneuver around that. And right now, uh, hearing you say 5 with 6 more to come, and then being with customers that want to lock in rates for 12 months, I can't commit to that, right? I don't know what my cost structure could be based on the regulatory changes that are unknown. And I'll say maybe not necessarily unknown, because there's things that we're pushing for around that. But really, how will that impact my cost structure is the unknown that I can't lock rates in for 12 months.
Well, even for small carriers that go into the used equipment market, um, if we get this recovery underway, they don't know what the price of a 3-year-old Peterbilt or Kenworth is going to be. They know what it's been, but if this market tightens up, and what if the insurance minimum is raised? So we are looking at things that both restrict capacity, but also add to the cost structure, which at the same time, because it prohibits aggressive expansion of capacity, that's another reason why it's at least plausible to contemplate a super cycle.
Yeah. So I would say here's the kind of the things that I'm looking at is driver demand. That right now with a supply recovery is something that I've never lived through before. What does the equipment availability look like? On the trailer side, I don't see any issues today. On the tractor, I'm hearing, but yet no one said absolutely not, no more tractors for you. But then really, how are my customers responding to me right now in different things? And people that I haven't hauled a load for in 4 years are coming to me for contract rates.
They want to be
Right.
your best friend again.
So there's things happening, but, and like, to say a 2-year recovery, wow, that feels amazing. We don't know what that feels like either. And how do you plan today for those pieces? But I think it's just really, as you think about that, one of the things I'm kind of in awe about is how many carriers today are still making decisions with their tail between their legs of what beat them up over the last 4 years, afraid to give a rate that's in the double digits, even though our cost structure has increased by double digits where we weren't able to recover on the revenue side. So it's almost like we talk about how is that changing my behavior, where most carriers today are trying, their only goal is to have a profitable year versus really thinking further out. Like, and it's just like, it's kind of like when you've been beat up so much, but yet it's like the time is now and you have to be courageous with
Have you
acting.
flipped that switch, Karen? Have you flipped
Yeah.
that switch? Are you moving in that direction now? Are you making bolder decisions in your area?
So I say that every market is unique. And if I just said, oh, here's like a 2-digit rate increase, and it's the same rate increase across every lane, my customer is going to look at me and say, you're just throwing stuff at me. You didn't actually analyze our data and how it fits in your network. And that's where you would get pushback. But yes, we're 100% making up for the losses that we endured when the market didn't allow for us to raise rates to the same degree as our costs increased.
Your comment about people still living in the past, and we're seeing that just in the last 6 months, of changes around driver recruiting. I mean, honestly, we have clients that are comparing today's results to what happened at the end of last year and even into the first quarter of this year. And the cost per leads, cost per hire, driver availability, driver options has changed dramatically over. I mean, the fact that they don't pick up the phone a lot of times because they have so many options, and that's just exponentially increased over the last 3 months.
Break that down more, Kevin. What are you seeing from the driver recruitment standpoint.
You know, you setting up today, just think of all the impact that's happened for the driver. Their competition for jobs has diminished significantly with all the exodus, with the non-domicile English speaking activity that we've talked about over and over again. And cost per leads, the marketing cost to attract these drivers, everybody's putting a lot more money into the market, which just has an exponential effect. But to me, it has come back to the drivers have more options now than ever before. And we still see a lot of companies trying to attract those drivers the way they used to when it was not a driver market, right? And so now you have to start changing that philosophy of convincing them that you are the right place for them to come to and really working to bring in those quality drivers. And again, that has just totally ramped up in just the last 3 months. I mean, that the surveys that we do to drivers and the opinions we get from drivers has changed dramatically year to date.
You know, what's interesting is I'll give you an example of someone that's forward looking versus someone that's backwards looking. So I was talking to the CEO of a large carrier, more than 3,000 trucks, and he said that they went out and identified $75 million of revenues that were clearly underpriced. They got that done in less than 2 weeks. Then they identified 100 million and then got that done very fast, and then 200 million. And this was all in their OTR division. And so it's there. And your service doesn't even necessarily have to be impeccable. I think shippers kind of know that as a cycle changes, there'll be a slight slippage in service, hopefully not falling through the floor. But, you know, I heard this said a long time ago by a really smart person that there's kind of 4 stages to every business cycle. And it doesn't really matter where you are, but one is prepare to thrive. Then you actually thrive. Then you prepare to endure. And then the 4th stage is you endure. And again, you can pick that anywhere, but you rinse and repeat, and this goes on forever. And so even before the vital signs for trucking started to improve in the 4th quarter, smart truckers already had their playbook. It didn't really matter if they had 50 trucks or 20 trucks or 3,000. You've got to have a game plan for when the environment changes. And, you know, as for whether it's going to be 4 years, 5 years, 2 years, let's take it 1 year at a time. I mean, I just watched the US Open golf tournament over the weekend, and for the first time in, I think, 12 years, we had a winner who led every single round of the US Open. Well, we could have said, you know, Wyndham Clark looked great on Thursday, looked great on Friday. He still had to go out and play the tournament to get the victory done. So for truckers to, you know, be fixated on a big number just because it's been a long time, that's the wrong thing. Get out, execute, work on your contracts. What's amazing is even though the vital signs began to improve in Q4 and really got going in the 1st quarter, several of the large public truckload carriers still lost money or only made literally nothing. And so even though the market has felt like it's shifted for shippers like in a big yeoman's way, and it has, that we're so far away from healthy profit margins and the ability to reinvest back in equipment that Karen talked about, as well as technology. I mean, there almost needs to be a super cycle so this industry can renormalize.
You know, that's a great point. I don't know that there's very many people actually out there talking about that, Tom. You bring up a great point in that, yeah, the market is coming back and everybody's optimistic about it and all of those things, but yet carriers, I'm sure, Karen, it was a tough time, right? It's across the board. And so um, getting back, at what point, like how far into this do you feel like carriers, companies like yours, Karen, are going to be like, now is the time to take the next step? Now's the time to get more aggressive because we have gotten past that. Hey, we're just trying to get back to a level playing field.
How much time? I think it depends on where they're at. Do they have banks breathing down their neck? Where's their liquidity? You know, cash is king when you're making these decisions. And so that's where I think that every single carrier is in different markets, but yet, you know, even with what Tom said, are you looking in the rearview mirror? Are you looking forward to what's ahead? And I think it's really saying, do you say this lane is important to my network? It feeds this market. I can't give them a market rate or I'm going to lose it, versus saying, because then you can so easily convince yourself, well, if I lose this lane, then I'm going to lose this driver and then I'm going to have a recruiting. And right. So you can sit here and convince yourself of not making any decisions, or you can be courageous and saying, this is what I'm valued at. There's only so many resources. And without this profit margin, it doesn't make sense to be in this business. We carry risk every time we put the truck on the highway. So to me, it's saying, take one step at a time. If you take a 180-degree swing, your customer is probably going to say, I'm going to go shop. But then you can say, well, is shopping actually a good thing? Because then they're going to get market rates brought to them when they go get this priced out. So I think that's where you really have to just determine what are those other intricacies and what are you actually selling? Are you selling technology to your customer? Are you selling assets? Are you selling customer service of your drivers? Are you selling on-time service? And what does poor service mean to them? So really knowing the customer to know what you can do with those rates is the most important.
Well, I think for small carriers too, and you can define that half a dozen different ways what a small carrier is, but let's say predominantly under 100 trucks, it's all about service. They're not expected necessarily to have a lot of technology beyond, the basics. So from a billing and collections perspective, from some level of safety and compliance, but the enterprise motor carriers, those that I define as offering three or more solutions. So for example, maybe OTR, dedicated brokerage, or intermodal gets thrown in. That's a different conversation that they have throughout every 4 or 5 year period. What are we doing technology wise? What are we doing service wise? There's a lot at work there. What are we doing to help you assess your supply chain overall? But for smaller carriers, you just can't wait. I mean, there was a famous quote, and I'll probably botch it. The commenting about the Federal Reserve years ago, someone commented that if the Fed waits until they see a recession, then it's too late. You have to understand data. And that was 40 years ago, before data was as prevalent as it is today. You've got to act now. Absolutely. Well, a moment ago, Karen and Kevin, I mentioned a sports analogy, Wyndham Clark winning the US Open over the weekend. I love to use sports analogies to get points across. So when I think about where profit margins have been, this would be, using a baseball analogy now, this would be the equivalent of a 300 hitter that has been hitting under 200. That's how bad the profit margin experience was these last 2.5 to 3+ years. The first year of this slump was coming off of a record high, but it has been so bad it's hard to fathom. Maybe it's the equivalent of a home run hitter who usually hits 40 home runs a year, barely being able to hit 10 to 12 home runs. That's how bad this freight slump was. And one thing I would like to stress is, so we're having fun talking about a super cycle, and there are elements to support that argument. But I would also say that if progress stopped with just the 5 big things that are in the marketplace right now, so that's English language proficiency, non-domiciled CDLs, that's the gradual elimination of self-certification of CDL mills and ELDs, followed by the Montgomery SCOTUS case, then I would say that the odds of a super cycle exceeding 2 years would greatly diminish. I do believe there needs to be more. We mentioned a couple around the edges. The industry's been so infused with so much bad supply for a while that some of that's going to figure out a way to come back in. And so there needs to be additional either enforcement and or tweaking of the regulations to make sure that this industry stays compliant, stays safe, and then increases the likelihood of a better profit recovery.
That's fantastic. The thing I love about this show between you two is we have Tom market, and now we get a transition over to Karen as an operator for a carrier. And I keep going back to Tom, your analogy to sports. Steph Curry, when he gets in a slump, he just keeps shooting, keep at it, right? Keep at it, and finally it comes around. So Karen, like, you're shooting, you keep shooting, you keep going through this whole change. And now we're not talking about the past anymore. I love your comment about moving into the future. So what are some big things you're thinking of right now when you have this whole super cycle word out there? Now, I don't know if you're like, how much of it's impressing on you, your actions right now, or you just kind of listening and waiting. But what's priority for you right now? Some of the big things.
Well, I'll say the best thing about sports analogies is people relate to sports. And if you can tie something fun into what they're doing in the day, it helps them remember it. So keep the sports analogies coming at me. Um, but I think, the things that I'm thinking about, you just us talking about super cycle here today, I don't use that word in my day-to-day office environment, right? So it's like, what am I looking at, and how am I communicating that to my team? Things such as that is, you're absolutely right. Keep shooting. And it's really just saying, is what rates haven't been reviewed in 90 days that need to be reviewed? Because as you're hiring drivers, their domiciles change and whatever that might be working. And so it's like, the biggest thing that I'm looking at is a 52-week cash flow. What does that look like? What does my revenue target have to be to afford the new truck at the current interest rates? What percent of those are going to be cash versus loan? And all of those different segments, because the fact that with the market that it is today, that we still have companies closing their doors and declaring bankruptcy is a huge signal to the shippers that if I've been hauling your freight for the last 42 years or 48 years or whatever it's been, you know that you need to give more for these carriers to be around. And now with the Supreme Court ruling, that's the other piece, is that they comprehend the safety that I've brought to them is actually even more important to them today, because that's the forecast on that side, is that the Supreme Court case ruling getting to the broker, shippers are next. And they're going to have to take some ownership in these scores outside of what the CSA scores show today. There's more to it, right? So, but the true things that I'm thinking about is the drivers are my supply, right? That I can go buy a used truck if I run out of tractors. And so the drivers are truly that baseline for me of saying, am I going to lower the bar on what drivers I bring into my fleet? And my answer is absolutely not. But my question for other fleets out there, are they doing that? Are they tempted to keep someone that they know is a risk in their fleet? Or are they going to hire someone that's outside of their hiring criteria? Are they going to change their hiring criteria? Because that's where they can get that money now, right? So there's higher revenue today than it was 6 months ago. And now, is that risk worth more? And I'd be curious if either of you are seeing changes in hiring criteria.
Yeah, I mean, we do that day in, day out, right? So definitely prior, you go reverse back a year ago, and even into late last year, it wasn't a driver market, right? I mean, it was a carrier market. They had the power, and yeah, they were only picking and choosing. I mean, we had sent tons of very qualified drivers, but they would only select the top a bit, and that's what I would do as a person hiring. But it's changing. We have seen job descriptions and change. We've seen the experience levels lower in certain jobs, and carriers just more willingness to take less. And it just goes back to, they have to fill these. You have to fill those seats, right? And so you don't want to risk safety and all of those things. But at one point, I mean, you could pick the cream of the crop and not worry about the rest. And now I think you're having to get a little bit deeper down into that mix and really go after those more experienced and higher quality drivers.
Kevin, I wonder if the mindset of carriers needs to change. In other words, people thinking traditionally, I've got to go get more drivers so I can say yes to more loads, or at least keep my fleet roughly flattish. But, we've heard a lot of people talk over the last several years that driver wages are below where they were, inflation adjusted, when deregulation occurred. And so what if we did really have an extended period, whether we call it a super cycle or just a structural repair, and finally, over the next 5 to 10 years, driver wages make such great gains that new people come into trucking, And then it makes it worthwhile to put your foot back on the accelerator around hiring again. We may be in a period where you just have to say enough is enough. Now, so I'll defer to you on whether people are lowering their standards. I don't think you said it quite that way around hiring drivers, but we know anecdotally that that's happened already with some of the freight brokers scrambling to get coverage of their loads. So, I mean, growth needs to go out of the mindset. Running in place is fine. Yield management needs to be the mindset. I don't care whether you got 1 or 2 trucks or 2,000 trucks. This is a yield management environment. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to our shipper friends. Probably not a lot that listen to this particular podcast, but a lot of them are confused, but it's because, they're in industries that are growing 1% or they're down 1.5% from a shipment count, depending on the industry. So they've been a little bit confused. How can we have a supply-led recovery? Everyone has said, well, there's been no such thing. Well, I would say we had an abuse of supply for years. It was on steroids once COVID hit, but there were already things being compromised between, let's say, 2014 or 15 and 2020. So, of course, we can have a supply recovery because we had an abuse of supply for a long time.
Absolutely. And
mic drop right there.
Well, Karen, how would you feel if you could go out and hire drivers and promise them the best inflation adjusted wages in years, not just we raised wages 12%?
I have a lot of amazing drivers that I know by name that I absolutely love and adore and are hard workers. And I can also say that when we've raised drivers' wages, they want to work less hours. And I still have a fixed expense on my equipment, right? So then that turns into the, now we're going to slip seat equipment to make sure the equipment is utilized properly, right? But yes, Tom, 100%. We actually did an increase on drivers' wages already this year. That amounted to about 5%. And we're rolling out another bonus that is promoted by Wheels Turning and Safety to give them some more money. So that's where I've been looking ahead for quite some time now, knowing that this trigger was going to have to get pulled and kind of giving it to the drivers before I got it from the customers.
And that's an age-old conversation. I've had it many, many times, even just the short period that I've been in there, about history of if you paid drivers more, would that help the retention issue? And should you be moving marketing dollars to retention dollars? And so we'll cover that, I'm sure, in an upcoming episode of Cents Per Mile. That would be a great topic to have.
Kevin, I'm going to respond to that. I think that if you can get drivers home when they need to be home, not a day early, because they had a birthday party the next day. Don't get them home. They want to be running miles the day before, right? So get them home when you say you're going to get them home, and you're going to help your retention.
Awesome.
But with that, let's close this out. One word. Are we in a super cycle? We'll start with you, Kevin.
I do not believe. I think there's so much. One word. I can't do one word. Too many other things that are implicating this that I think will help carriers be way more efficient than before. Got the AI thing coming in, a lot of other issues hitting. And so my answer is no, I don't think it'll be a super cycle. I think it's definitely an up market for sure coming.
Awesome. Tom?
Yes, but with the caveats I previously described. But yes.
Great.
And I'm going to go 2 feet in. Yes, that there will be too many carriers that aren't here in 6 months if this doesn't last, because the down market was way too long to not have one today. So with that, thank you for joining us today. Like, subscribe. You can find us at freightwavestv.com, centspermilepodcast.com. And please share any topics that you'd like us to cover.